Hello and welcome to the next STEM Lockdown Digital School lesson for Grade 10 IT. As I have just mentioned, my name is Karen Anderson and this is another lesson of Grade 10 Information Technology. So, what are we doing today? This is lesson 15, as you can see. We're going to go through the gardening activity, which I gave you to do for homework in the previous lesson. I'm also going to go through the gym activity, which was another one that I gave you that was quite a simple basic one just to practice using a case statement. Then I'm going to explain radio groups, combo boxes and list boxes, and all three of them work very similarly in your Delphi program. So there are common properties that I'm going to discuss that fit in with all three of those components. Then I'm going to have a look at some more validation techniques. And finally, I'm going to give you some homework to practice these skills from this lesson. So this was the activity that I gave you in the previous lesson. I mentioned that Lawrence had a garden service and that he had his rates that he charged as follows in the table. So if it was 1 to 2 hours per week, then he charged 250 Rand per hour. And as the number of hours increased, so the rate per hour decreased. You were expected to then create the interface as shown below, and I gave you, because this wasn't from a textbook, I gave you a screenshot of what I was looking for. Simple form with one spin edit, one button, and one panel. And I gave you a screenshot of the structure so that you would know what was expected. Everything had a name except for this label here because you weren't going to use it in your code. Then the actual code would look like this. So in the on-click event of the calculate button, you would declare your two local variables because you don't have any other events, so you wouldn't need to have any variables anywhere else. Hours would then get the value of what was entered into the spin edits value property. So whatever number of hours the user entered into the spin edit, then that number of hours was evaluated using a case statement. And the code goes as follows. Case hours of. In other words, have a look at the number of hours, and if they were 1 to 2, then amount must get number of hours times 250. If hours was 3 to 4, then amount must get hours times 200. If it was 5 to 6, then amount must get hours times 175. And finally, the last one, if it was 7 to 8, then it must get hours times 150. So remember that a case statement is like a nested if. So only one of these options is going to be executed. And that's why it's possible to refer to amount in all of them, because amount is going to get a specific value of hours times however much it is, depending on what hours equals. And then I added the optional else part. Remember, the else doesn't have to be there. You could leave from else up to this end out of the case statement completely. And all that this else statement is doing is it's assigning 0 to amount. So if it isn't any one of these numbers, then amount is going to get 0, and we'll have a show message that pops up and says, please enter a valid amount. And then after the entire case statement, our output is to just display amount. And please note that float to string f can also be used with integers. So if you apply ff currency to an integer value, it's still going to display it with the currency setting of your computer. What I've done over here is I've included a different way of doing this, which is actually probably even more correct, because I said from 1 to 2, but in actual fact it's only 1 or 2. because there's nothing in between 1 and 2. So why would I say 1 to 2? I would rather say 1 or 2. The other option would be 3 or 4, 5 or 6, 7 or 8. But either one of these can be seen as being correct. This one is just more correct. Again, please also note that there is still no semicolon before the else. And if I want more than one thing to happen in my else statement, then those more than one things have to have their own brackets around them. So that was the simple solution to that particular activity. Now we move on to the more difficult one, which was the gym menu option, which was an activity in the Dandelion Delphi ebook 1, or book 1 for grade 10. So I'm going to quickly go through a few things in the question, but you should have actually read it yourself if you have done it as homework for the previous lesson. So you were told to store the input for the user's height in the edit. Then they had to select a checkbox that indicated whether they were a Vitality member or not, and it would store a Boolean value of either checked equals true or checked equals false, depending on whether they selected it or not. And then there was a dialog box that got their current weight. And remember, as I've said so many times, dialog box, when we're receiving input, is an input box. Then your code had to calculate their BMI using the given formula, which is weight divided by height squared. And then you had to calculate and store their monthly membership cost using a given constant. So if they were Vitality members and their BMI was 24.9 or less, then they would get a 75% discount. Just a Vitality member would get a 25% discount, and any other members don't get a discount at all. They would have to pay full price. Then the rest of the question said, in a dialog box, now we're talking show message, display a message that indicates the person's discount or full price. So here's a bigger screenshot of what it would be. So it would be Vitality member number 1, in this instance, gets a 75% discount. Then there are other examples here. So if you can see, Vitality member number 2 would only get a 25% discount, and the next one would have to pay full price, or one of them would have to pay full price. Then in the rich edit, you also then had to display their monthly cost, their height, their weight, their BMI. So here you can see this person had a BMI lower than what was required in the if statement. This one had higher, so there they would have paid more. And this person is obviously not a Vitality member, and they've got quite a large BMI, so therefore they would have to pay the full price. Okay, so let's have a look at what the code should look like. So first of all of your input. The height came in from the edit, the weight came in from the input box, and B Vitality, being a Boolean variable, will store the checked property of the checkbox. So if the person selected the checkbox, then the checked property would be true, so therefore B Vitality would store true. If the checkbox was left unchecked, then the checked property would be false, and therefore assigning the checked property to B Vitality would mean that B Vitality would hold the value of false. So I'm taking what the checked property of my checkbox is and putting it into my Boolean variable. So it would be something similar if I said I left gets the value of btn click dot left. I would put the left property of the button into a variable. Here I'm putting the checked property, or the value that the checked property holds, into a Boolean variable. What I've done up here is I just took a screenshot and I included it. The constant that was declared right at the top of the unit for the gym membership was 1,250. So that constant tells you how much a full gym membership costs. Then I needed to do my processing. So the first thing was to calculate the person's BMI. So we took their weight divided by the square of their height. So remember the formula said height squared. In order to calculate that in Delphi, I have to apply the square function to our height. Then, for two reasons, the BMI has to be real. The first one is because I'm dividing. Whenever you divide, your variable that holds the result of that division has to be real. The other one was, as I said in a previous lesson, square always returns a real value. So even if I wasn't dividing, having the square function in this calculation would have been enough to ensure that the BMI had to go into a real variable. Then I needed to go into my nested if statement to determine how much this person is going to pay for their gym membership. So the first if statement says, if B vitality and our BMI is less than or equal to 24.9. Because remember, vitality members with a BMI of 24.9 and less get a 75% discount. So this is what I'm determining here. Now, I said to you in the previous lesson that if you have multiple conditions in an if statement, each of those conditions has to have brackets around it. And here I've broken my own rule because there are no brackets around the B vitality. Now the reason for that is because it's a word. Delphi's not going to confuse what goes with it for something else. And the reason why it's only one word is, as I've also said before, if you are testing for equals true, you don't have to type equals true. It's assumed. So that's why you can say if B vitality. It's exactly the same as saying if B vitality equals true. So I'm saving myself an equal sign and 4 letters. Okay, less typing I have to do, the happier I am. So if B vitality and the RBMI condition must be in brackets, so that my programming language knows that those go together. If both of those are true, remember and needs them both to be true, so B vitality is true and the BMI is less than or equal to 24.9, then inc I vitality. Now, this was because you needed to count how many vitality members there were, because you needed to display in the show message, you are vitality member number 1, and then the next person is vitality member number 2. If they're not a vitality member, then we don't show that. Then we just say full price. So we increment the I vitality. Hopefully you are all, because you've done this activity, having a look at this and knowing that if I see this statement, inc a variable, it means that this variable had to be initialized somewhere. And most likely, it's going to be initialized in the onActivate event of the form. So when the form first loads, that's when I'm going to initialize my counter that's counting how many vitality members there are. Okay, it also means that if I am adding to it and if I have initialized it in the onActivate event of the form, it had to be declared under private. It means that I vitality is a global variable. You will see that it is not declared locally in this menu click option because it is being initialized in one event and added to in another one. Then my output. So within my if statement, If they are a Vitality member and their BMI is less than 24.9, then I'm going to increment my counter and I'm going to show message Vitality member I Vitality. So the first time round, it's going to be Vitality member 1 plus #10, another throwback to a previous lesson, because what does #10 do? It forces what comes after it onto a new line. So if we go back and we have a look at our sample output, there you can see the 75% discount is underneath the text Vitality member number I Vitality count. So if we have a look back at our code here, there's the #10 and there's the 75% discount that forces it onto the new line. My code has it all in one line next to each other. The #10 makes the 75% discount go onto a new line. Then the next thing that needed to be done if they were a Vitality member with a low BMI is to calculate what their gym cost would be. The gym cost is going to be gym, which is my constant, minus gym times 75 divided by 100, because it was 75%. What is 75%? 75 out of 100. Everybody in school knows that a percent is what it is out of 100. So if it's out of, it means divide. So to calculate 75%, I'm going to take the gym amount and multiply it by 75 out of 100 and then subtract it from the total. Okay. You could have also calculated 25% because that's obviously what they're going to pay if they have a 75% discount. Okay. Right, so those all have to happen if this if is true. Else, if B Vitality. So now I don't have multiple conditions. I only want to know if they checked the checkbox that said that they were a Vitality member. Then begin. Still inc I Vitality because they're still a Vitality member. So I still want to count them as a Vitality member. Then I show message Vitality member number, whatever. And again the same code plus #10 plus 25% discount this time, and that's also going to go underneath what number member they are. And then my calculation is the same thing, except I'm multiplying the gym cost by 25 out of 100 because they're only getting a 25% discount. So here the cost is going to hold a different value because they're only a Vitality member. And then the last part of my nested if is just an else, because then you're not a Vitality member and your BMI is not less than or equal to 24.9, so therefore our cost gets the full gym price, and my show message just tells them full price, sorry for you. And then after the if statement, so all of this is if statement, after the if statement, not anywhere inside any of this, I then output the cost, their weight, their height, and their BMI, and I add a blank line underneath it so that I can separate them. So if you have a look here, that's so that you can group the sections together so that it looks neater. Okay, so that was the gym membership activity. So hopefully if you didn't do it, you can now understand. I recommend you don't look at this. You've heard me explain it. Go and see if you can now do it on your own before you come and look at this solution again. Oopsie. Right, now we move on to the radio group, the combo box, and the list box. Now all three of these components, as you can see, are there to give the user options. So it's a way to restrict them to certain selections that you want to give them. So if I am asking somebody to enter their grade, I give them from grade 8 to grade 12 to choose, so that they're not going to do something silly and tell me that they're in grade 16. Okay, the combo box is a drop-down list that does the same thing. It allows a user to select the option that they would like. You've got to be a little bit more careful of a combo box though, because they can allow a user to type in them. And then the list box, when you look at it on a program, looks an awful lot like a rich edit. But it has the added functionality that allows the user to select one of the options that are listed. So I have a Delphi program here. It's exactly the same program with these three components. And what I want to do is run the program to show you what the user will see. So here's my radio group with my options. You can see this is not a very user-friendly description, but that was just so that you could see what it's called. As soon as I select one, and I can only choose one of the options, there's no way that my program is going to allow me to select more than one of them. But as soon as I click on one, a black dot appears in the one that I have selected. So this would allow me to select grade 10 as my grade. My combo box also has something that's not very user-friendly here, and it could be a problem because the user is able to type in there. Okay, but the idea behind a combo box is when you click the arrow, the options that you as the programmer have added then allow the user to make a choice, and as soon as they select one of those options, the drop-down list disappears and the one that they've selected then appears in the combo box. And the last one, like I said, this looks just like a rich edit to look at it, but the difference is if you select something in the list box, it is actually selected, it is highlighted to indicate that it has been selected. So all three of these components are to help you make sure that the user does what you want them to with your program. But then in order to do that, you have to be sure that you use these components correctly. And they have some properties that it's very important to understand and use correctly. So let's have a look at them. So the items property is what stores the words that appear in the different options. And the data type of the items property is string. So if I go back to my Delphi program, I'll show you what I mean. So let's say I select my radio group. I then go to the object inspector and I find the items property. If I click on the three dots next to the items property, there are all the options that I had already typed into my radio group. If I wanted to add another one, I could type in there and type degree, for example. And then maybe I could type honors. If I now click OK, my radio group now has two additional options added with their own little radio button dot for the user to select. Combo box is exactly the same. If I select the combo box, I find the items property, I click the three dots, there are all the subjects that I had already entered into the combo box. If I now type business studies and I click OK, I can't see it now, but if I run my program, and it's going to take a while, and I click my arrow, there is business studies added as one of the items in my combo box. And the list box works the same way. Select the list box, find the items property, click the three dots, and let's add, I know the rest of them are basically winter sports, but let's add swimming. And I click OK, and now I have an additional option in my list box. So remember that the items property is the text that you see next to whichever one, and the radio group has something to select. The rest of them are just lists. But the items property holds the words describing the option. Now I need to see, how does my program know which one has been selected? So if the user comes along and they select grade 10 in my radio group, how does my program know that that's the one that they selected? Conveniently, each of these three components has a property called an item index. And the item index records which option was selected starting from 0. And the item index is an integer data type. So there it is over there. The item index is an integer data type, which means it can be used very effectively in a case statement. So what the item index means is, if the user selects this option here, the item index is recorded as being number 0. Remember that our Delphi components number from 0. So the item index is recorded as 0 because that's the first one, and so it counts down. So the item index of grade 10 is 2. So as soon as the user selects grade 10, it then tells me that the radio group's item index is set at 2. And exactly the same thing works for these two. Now again, I'm going to show you in Delphi what I mean. So since our list box is already selected, I'm going to keep, actually no I'm not, I'm going to go rather to the radio group because that's the example I've used in the code in the PowerPoint. So if I select my radio group and I find the item index property, you will see, and that's important for just now, you'll see that currently the item index is set to -1. That means nothing has been selected. If I change that to 4 and I press enter, then grade 12 is selected because it's 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. So now there's a dot next to grade 12 because the item index of my radio group is 4. If I put it on 1, then grade 9 is selected. If I go to my combo box, again you'll see that its item index is -1, and if I change that to 2, then it shows me science in my combo box as the third option because it's numbered from 0. So that's how the item index works. So item index tells me which one was selected. Items tells me the text next to which one was selected. So now we can use these two things together. And this gets quite complicated. So I'm going to go back to Delphi to show you. But first of all, I'm going to set my item index back to -1. Okay, -1 deselects everything. And then I'm going to double click on the radio group because that's the default on-click event of the radio group. So it means that when the user selects the radio group, something is going to happen. Now, first of all, I need to just make sure I need to add a label to my form so that I can display in the label which one they have selected. And I'm going to be very naughty and I'm going to leave it as label 1. I should have renamed it, but I'm going to leave it as, in the interests of speed, I'm going to leave it as label 1. So label 1 dot caption gets the value of RGP, control space bar, select options. So radio group options dot items. Okay. Now, as we discussed before, the items property returns the text. So I'm happy. String data type for caption, string data type for radio group. But I have to tell my program which one was selected. And what holds which one was selected? The item index. So after this, I have to put square brackets, and inside the square brackets, I say, okay, it is the radio groups, RGP, the radio groups dot item index. So now it's going to find the item index, which one was selected, and then it's going to display the text next to the one that was selected in the label. So if I select degree, it shows degree. If I select grade 10, it shows grade 10. If I select grade 12, it shows grade 12. Now what I want to show you, just to indicate what I am talking about here, is I'm going to comment out this code. I'm going to copy this. If I didn't put the radio group's item index, let's say I only put a 2 in there and I ran my program, then no matter what I selected, remember we're starting at 0, 0, 1, 2, grade 10 will always be displayed. So let's click on grade 12 and see what happens. Grade 10 is shown. Honors, grade 10. Grade 10, yay, now it's right. But if I select any of the others, it's wrong because I have set the default item index to 2. So this is not going to work. I have got to take the items property and say which item must I display using the item index. Okay, so here we have exactly the same thing being displayed again, and here we've just broken it down. So the item index in this example is going to equal 3 because it's 0, 1, 2, 3. The radio group's items 3 equals grade 11, which means that items is going to hold grade 11 or indicate grade 11, and S item, my variable from this line of code, is going to hold grade 11 because the item index is going to return which one was selected, and the items is going to tell me what text is next to the one that was selected. And as I showed you in Delphi just now, if I want to clear the selection, if I want to say, okay, nothing is selected, I set the item index to -1. Right, so let's have a look at exactly how we would use this in a case statement. So again, I've got my grades. Now it looks nicer because I've put a heading or a caption on my radio group that says select a grade, and I've got my grades listed. And my case statement looks like this. Case RGP options dot item index of. So my case statement is going to evaluate the item index of the radio group. So if the item index was 0, then I'm going to increment my counter for the number of grade 8s that have used this program and selected their grade as grade 8. If the item index is 1, then it means it was this one that was selected, so therefore I have to add 1 onto the number of grade 9s. If it was 2, then it means that this person selected that one, add 1 onto the grade 10s. And so if it was 3 or 4, so it's going to add 1 to one of my counters depending on the item index of my radio group. Then these components, just like a radio group, also have an add method. So I could, in my Delphi code, I could go RGP options dot items instead of dot lines with the regedit, dot items dot add, and I could add another value to the end of my radio group using my code. So instead of doing it in Delphi, instead of having degree and honors here, I could type code that said RGP options dot items dot add degree, and it would do it when I clicked the button or when my program ran or whatever it was that I wanted to do. Okay, so that's what the items add line of code will do. Then how do I use this in validation? Now, another form of validation, which I have mentioned in previous lessons, is your presence check. You have to check that the user has either selected something or entered something before you try and use that something. So as I explained in a previous lesson, if you're getting particularly numerical input from the user, you have to first check if the edit's text property equals nothing. So if the edit's text property equals nothing, and then your program tries to convert that nothing to a number, you're going to have a runtime error. So you first check if it equals nothing, then you show them a message that says, enter something, and you exit the procedure. When it comes to a radio group, you have to check if the item index equals -1. Remember, we've discussed the fact that if the item index equals -1, it means nothing was selected. So then that's what you do. If the radio group's item index equals -1, then show a message that says, please select an option. And once again, exit the event. Don't execute any other code that comes after this if statement. Okay. Otherwise, you'd have to put in an else for your if statement. Else, read in the number, take what they've asked, display it, or whatever it is. Okay. Right, and here comes your homework. Now, I've given you one that I think you must absolutely do, and it's quite a tricky one. And then I've told you that you can do the Gold Reef City and the schools tabs for extra practice. I'm going to, in tomorrow's lesson, cover the solutions to all three of these questions. So let's quickly go through what they're asking. This one's quite an involved question, so you need to read it carefully. First of all, you have a budget, which is a real value that has been assigned an amount of 1,000. So you're designing a program that helps a learner draw up a budget for their available pocket money, and the pocket money is stored in a variable called RBudget, and it's assigned a value of 1,000. Then what you have to do is start off and say, has the user selected an option from RGP budget? So if we go back here, here are the items they can choose. Step one is when they click the add button, have they actually selected something? The next thing you have to do is test if they've entered a value into the edit. So again, they're going to say, okay, I want to spend 200 Rand on shoes. Then it's going to remove the 200 Rand from or add to their budget, but it's going to remove it from the available 1,000 Rand. But you have to check, have they actually said how much they want to spend, and have they selected what they want to spend it on? So that's your first 2 bullet points. Then you need to store the item description from the user's selection in the radio group. So in a variable, you have to put the word that goes with each of these radio buttons. Then you have to store the amount of money they'd like to spend, which I've discussed. If they've typed something in the edit, put it into a variable. If the amount will not cause the user to exceed their budget, deduct the amount from the global variable. So if you have a look here, if the amount is not going to take them over budget, then deduct it. So if I've got 1,000 Rand available in my budget and I decide to spend 2,000 Rand on shoes, it's going to go, hang on a second, 1,000 minus 2,000 is too much. Sorry, you cannot buy or spend 2,000 Rand on shoes. If I only wanted to spend 200 Rand on shoes, then it would be okay. So that's what this last one is here. If the amount will cause the user to go over their budget, display a message indicating this and don't deduct it from the budget. and then you prevent the rest of the code from executing. So again, to prevent the rest of the code from executing, you will be using the exit procedure. Then the next step is to determine and store if the item is essential or not. So certain items are classified as being essential on that list, and those are books, clothes, and data. So if they've selected one of these three in the radio group, then it's classified as being essential. If they selected other, store it as uncategorized. So here is other. So clothes, data, and books are considered essential. Other is unclassified, and then all the rest of them are seen as non-essential items. So you have to store in a variable whether they are essential, non-essential, or uncategorized. And you also have to count how many essentials have they selected, how many non-essentials, and how many uncategorized items, and display the values in the label LBL output. So there's an example of how many essential, how many non-essential, and how many uncategorized. Okay, and this output, yes, it's right, because that's the heading. Display the item, amount of money spent, money left in their budget, and whether the item is essential, non-essential, or categorized in neat columns. Remember, we've gone over this. If you see in neat columns, it means that you have to set tabs and apply the tabs. So here's an example. This person's got 200 Rand left in their budget. If they then say, okay, now I want to spend 500 Rand on something, then there's going to be a message that pops up and says, you cannot afford this item. And it won't allow them to minus it from their budget. Right, then the remove button is now if they change their mind and they just decide, if you have a look over here, actually, originally I said I wanted to spend 200 Rand on books, but now I've decided I only want to spend 100, so I'm going to remove 100 Rand from my allocated budget, which gives me more money for something else. So remember now, you've got 1,000 Rand budget, maybe you've spent some money. If you want to remove something from the budget, you're adding money to the budget. So I'm not going to spend 100 Rand on a book. That means that 100 Rand is still there in the budget for me if I want to spend it on something else. So ensure that by removing the amount from the budget, you will not be going over the total amount. So again, I can't end up with more than 1,000 because that's what I started with. If it's an acceptable amount, add the amount to the budget and display it, and deduct the item from its category. So remember now, my books were counted as essential. If I decide I'm not buying it anymore, then I've got less or fewer essential items in my list. If it's not an acceptable amount to remove, display an appropriate error message. So there's your appropriate error message saying, sorry, you're going to exceed your 1,000 Rand budget. So that's the activity that I want you to do for homework. It's quite a long one, it's quite a tricky one, but it's very good practice for things like tests and exams. And I will be going through the solution to this activity tomorrow. Then the next one, you need to look in the Dandelion Delphi book on page 75 and do this activity, which covers the Gold Reef City question. So you can do that as an extension, in other words, to extend your skills in writing these programs. And then you also can do the schools activity, which is on page 76 in the Dandelion Delphi book, which is also good practice for all of these skills to try and see if you can complete the activity. Right, so what have we learned today? We've gone through a very simple gardening activity. We've gone through a more complicated gym activity. I've explained radio groups, combo boxes, and list boxes, and the fact that all of them have items and item index properties, and that the item index property can be used in a case statement. And then we had a look at another validation technique, which is called the presence check. So we've also, once again, done quite a bit in this lesson, and I've left you with quite a bit of work to do. Once again, if you need them, there's the link to where you could go and purchase the Dandelion Delphi textbook. This is the link to where you can get the data if you just want to use the PowerPoint presentation or the video to see how to do some of these activities. You can get the data from there. And then you can visit the Africa Teen Geeks website to check on the schedules for when the lessons are happening and if there are other files and interesting things that you'd like to know. So in the next lesson, we're going to go through the solutions to all of the activities that I've just given you for homework to make sure that you're on the right track. And then we're going to go back, and I know that we did this, but we're going to go back quickly just to remind you about how we change the properties of objects dynamically. If you can't remember what dynamically means, you will find out in the next lesson. Right, remember to check the Africa Teen Geeks YouTube channel for the videos for all of the different lessons that are being uploaded. And I thank you for watching this lesson, and I hope that you have learned something. I'll chat to you soon. Bye.